The movie begins with a man in a restroom. He coughs violently, then takes his inhaler to calm down. Once he regains control, he returns to his desk to work. This man is Joe Baylor, a troubled LAPD officer who has been demoted to work as a 911 operator while awaiting a court hearing for an incident that occurred on duty 8 months earlier. But what exactly was that incident? Stick around to find out. At his desk, Joe receives various calls, some from people asking for help, others making complaints, especially about a fire outbreak happening in the city. While speaking with one caller, Joe gets another call on his cell phone. He picks up, and a woman on the other end immediately begins questioning him without hesitation. She asks Joe to give her his side of the story before he appears in court the next day. When Joe asks who is calling, the woman introduces herself as Catherine Harbor, a journalist. Joe isn't comfortable speaking to anyone, let alone a journalist who failed to introduce herself before making demands, so he hangs up. He goes back to work, taking calls and apathetically advising people on what to do. One man calls to complain that a woman robbed him in his car. Joe asks how that was possible, and the caller, Matthew, tries to cover his story by saying the woman jumped into his car. But as Joe presses him with more questions, Matthew's answers reveal that he was actually robbed by a sex worker he had picked up. After collecting Matthew's information and license plate number, Joe calls in an LAPD dispatcher. The voice on the other end recognizes him. It's Sergeant Miller. They catch up briefly. Miller explains that he's also on phone duty for now but will be back in the field tomorrow. Joe mutters that he can't wait. He truly misses working as a detective, that's where the action is, and this desk job doesn't suit him. Finally, Joe relays Matthew's report about being robbed before returning to the call, where Matthew complains about his wife.
Hey, I've got a wife, man, okay? She's very strong physically, business, you know?
Officers are on their way, sir.
Afterward, Joe decides to take a quick break. He steps outside and calls his estranged wife, Jess. The call goes to voicemail, so Joe leaves a message. He says he knows he shouldn't disturb her but asks if their daughter, Paige, is awake. He'd like to say goodnight. He ends the call and heads back inside. Sitting at his desk, Joe drowns in thought, staring at the bubbling water feature until his partner snaps him back to the present. It's clear he has a lot weighing on his mind. But what exactly is troubling him so much, and why was he demoted? Joe notices another call coming in and picks up. On the other end, he hears a woman speaking with a shaky, tearful voice. She whispers, calling Joe, sweetie, and saying, don't be afraid. Her name is Emily. At first, Joe assumes she's drunk, until he hears a man's voice in the background. In that instant, Joe realizes Emily must be in danger and works to keep her talking. He asks if the man with her knows she called 911. Emily whispers no. Joe asks if the man thinks she called her child, and she says yes. Joe tells her he'll only ask yes or no questions to avoid alerting the man. He asks if she's been abducted. Emily whispers yes. He asks if her abductor has a weapon. Emily says she doesn't know. Joe continues questioning her to narrow down her location. When the man starts demanding the phone, Joe tells Emily to say her child is upset and doesn't want to hang up. Joe then quickly switches lines and calls the California Highway Patrol. He reports a possible abduction in progress, telling them the woman is traveling in a vehicle somewhere on the I-10 heading east toward downtown. He asks if any officers are available. The dispatcher says one unit is nearby and will send it to intercept Emily's car. When asked if he has the license plate, Joe admits he doesn't. Joe switches back to Emily to comfort her. He tells her to answer yes when he correctly guesses the car's details. He learns it's a white van, but before he can get more information, the man with Emily grows suspicious, and she abruptly ends the call. Joe switches back to the highway patrol and relays what he's learned. He demands to be connected directly with the officer dispatched to intercept the van. When the dispatcher hesitates, Joe shouts until they comply. He's connected to Officer Rodriguez, who confirms he's on the I-10 eastbound. Joe tells him to look for a white van. Rodriguez and his team soon spot one and pull it over. Unfortunately, upon inspection, they realize it's the wrong van. They inform Joe, but he angrily cuts Rodriguez off mid-sentence. Joe calls the highway patrol line again and informs them the officers stopped the wrong van. The dispatcher says they'll keep freeway units updated but adds that Joe must get Emily's license plate number. Joe decides to call Emily's home contact number. A little girl picks up. It's Emily's daughter. Joe gently talks to her and asks her name and age. She says her name is Abby, and she's 6 years old. Abby begins crying, asking about her mommy, while Joe tries to calm her down. He asks if she's alone at home, and Abby explains she's with her baby brother. The little girl keeps insisting she wants her mommy. Joe reassures her that her mom is going to be alright. He then asks about Abby's dad. Abby says he was home earlier that day but got into a fight with her mom, after which he took her away in a white van. Joe asks for her dad's name, and Abby says it's Henry. She also mentions that Henry gave her a phone number to call him anytime. Joe asks Abby to read the number out loud, and she does. Afterwards, Joe tells Abby to stay with her brother and promises to send police officers to keep them safe. After the call, Joe runs Henry's number and pulls up all his information. He then calls the California Highway Patrol and relays Henry's details, including his license plate number, also mentioning that Henry had previously been charged with assault. The Highway Patrol dispatcher thanks him for the information and assures him they'll work on the case. But Joe isn't satisfied, he wants immediate action. He starts suggesting what the dispatcher should do, but the man cuts him off. He tells Joe he's tolerated him all night, and it's time for Joe to back off and focus on his own job while they handle theirs. Then the dispatcher ends the call. Joe's partner notices his frustration and tries to ask what's going on, but Joe lashes out, causing him to back off. Frustrated, Joe tries another dispatcher line to request officers to check on Abby and her baby brother, but everyone is tied up because of the fire emergency. His phone rings again. When he picks up, it's Catherine Harbor, once again pressing him for his side of the story before the court hearing tomorrow. Joe, now furious at her constant persistence, tells her never to call him again. After sitting in thought for a while, Joe approaches his coworker Manny. He admits he's been a jerk most of the time and offers to buy him a beer after work. Manny quickly forgives him, especially at the mention of beer. Joe uses this opening to ask if Manny would still have access to his call history and records if he logged into another computer. Manny confirms that he would. Joe scribbles something on a piece of paper, then abruptly walks away.
What about the beer?
Joe sneaks into a private office and logs into a secure computer. He calls a dispatcher, and Sergeant Miller picks up. Joe tells him he needs his help. When Miller asks what's going on, Joe explains the situation. Emily may have been kidnapped, and her kids are home alone. Miller agrees to help, but Joe's controlling nature kicks in. He orders Miller to also send officers to Henry's house, insisting that Henry must have taken Emily there. Joe even suggests they kick Henry's door down if necessary. Miller warns Joe to be careful. He reminds him that his irrational behavior is what got him demoted in the first place, and urges him to calm down. Miller says he'll check Henry's house but makes it clear there will be no door kicking, adding that maybe Henry isn't even the culprit. After the call, Joe dials his estranged wife, Jess. She answers but immediately tells Joe they can't keep doing this, it's clear their family has serious issues. Joe says he just wanted to say goodnight to their daughter. Jess points out that it's already 2 a.m., and Paige is asleep. Knowing how easily Joe loses his temper, Jess tries to end the call quickly. Joe pushes her to keep talking, admitting it's hard being alone in an Airbnb, just watching TV. Jess reminds him they've been separated for 6 months. When Joe asks if she'll be at court tomorrow, Jess firmly says it isn't a good idea before ending the call. Joe's life feels like a complete mess, spiraling with everything going on. Soon after, he gets a call from the 911 emergency line. On the other end, a man is screaming for help, saying people are shooting. In his panic, the man curses over the phone. Joe, already on edge, mistakes it as the man cursing at him. He snaps and curses back before angrily ending the call.
Fuck me! Fuck you! Go to hell! Fuck you!
A while later, Joe decides to call Henry directly. Henry answers, and Joe identifies himself as LAPD. He asks if Henry knows whether Emily and the kids are home. Henry casually says he and Emily are separated. Joe tells him the kids are home alone and suggests he check on them. But Henry brushes it off, saying he's busy and it's too late. Then Joe hears a faint, whimpering voice in the background. He immediately assumes Henry is torturing Emily. His anger explodes, he accuses Henry of kidnapping Emily and threatens him.
I know you've done time at LAC, huh? You want to do more?
Henry stays calm and simply hangs up. When Joe calls back, it goes straight to voicemail. Defeated, Joe slams down the phone and crashes out. He manages to pull himself together and decides to make another call. Joe dials Rick, his partner in the field, who is supposed to represent him in court the next day. Joe asks where he is, and Rick says he's at work. Joe calls him out, saying he knows Rick isn't at work, and asks if he's been drinking again. Rick tries to lie but eventually admits it. He apologizes, and Joe tells him it's okay, but warns him not to drink too much, saying he doesn't want Rick showing up to court hungover. Joe then changes the subject and asks Rick for a favor. He wants Rick to drive over to Henry's house and check out the situation. Rick asks why, but Joe only gives a vague answer. Regardless, Rick agrees. After their call, a female officer tells Joe a young girl is on the line asking for him. Joe tells her to patch the call through. It's Abby. She says the police have arrived at her house. Abby gives the phone to one of the officers, who describes the scene. The house is a mess, and Abby has blood on her clothes. Joe urgently asks about Abby's little brother, Oliver, and the officers go to check on him. Suddenly, Joe hears shouting and chaos on the line. The officers yell for an ambulance, making it clear something terrible has happened to Oliver. Abby begins crying, and the line cuts off in the midst of the panic. Realizing Oliver must be gravely injured, Joe immediately calls Henry. He shouts at him, demanding to know where he is. Henry hesitates, asking what will happen if he tells. Joe yells that Henry will go back to prison and accuses him of hurting, or even killing, his baby. Henry can't take the barrage anymore and hangs up. When Joe calls back, it goes to voicemail. Moments later, Rick calls Joe from Henry's address, demanding to know what's going on. Joe tells him the man who lives there killed one of his kids and abducted his ex-wife. They need to know where he's taking her. Rick enters the house and reports what he sees. It's empty, with stacks of unopened letters scattered on the floor, everything from parking tickets to unpaid bills. Joe asks what else is there, but Rick says it will take time to sort through. Joe impatiently tells him to hurry and ends the call. Joe tries Emily's number again, and this time it goes through. Emily is sobbing, saying she's afraid and just wants to go home. Joe calms her, assuring her she will be home soon. He asks where she is, and Emily replies that she's sitting. Joe instructs her to fasten her seatbelt. Once she does, he tells her to yank the handbrake. She does, and the van crashes. The line cuts off. Joe frantically tries to call back, but it doesn't go through. A while later, Emily calls again. She says Henry caught her and put her back in the van. She keeps crying, saying she's going to die, begging Joe to stay with her. Joe promises he will, but quickly calls the highway patrol first, reporting the van and its route. The dispatcher tells him they can't help without a concrete address. Frustrated, Joe switches back to Emily. Her fear is overwhelming. Joe coaches her to breathe with him until she calms down. He tells her to feel around, and she finds a box filled with bricks. Joe instructs her to hold one, and when Henry opens the back door, to strike him as hard as she can. Emily agrees. To comfort her, Joe asks about her kids. Emily says she loves taking them to the aquarium, where it's peaceful. Abby loves the turtles but not the sharks. When Joe asks what Emily likes, she says she enjoys everything, and even tells Joe she likes him. She asks if he'd join them at the aquarium next time, and Joe gently agrees. Then Emily brings up Oliver. She says he had snakes in his tummy, and she had to take them out. She asks Joe if Oliver is okay now. In that moment, the truth hits Joe like a hammer. Henry wasn't the culprit, Emily was. She had cut her son, believing she was helping him, and Henry took her away after discovering the horrific scene. Emily keeps talking until the van stops. Joe, devastated, listens as she strikes Henry with the brick. The line goes dead. Soon after, Rick calls back. He says he found unpaid bills from Patton State Hospital, a psychiatric treatment center, and that Emily had been a patient there. Joe, shaken, calls Henry. Henry explains that Emily was once on medication, but after their money ran out, no one came to help, not even the police. He thought they could manage without the meds, but things only got worse. Joe sympathizes, apologizes for misunderstanding, and asks if Henry knows where Emily is. Henry doesn't. Crying over his son's condition, Henry adds that Emily doesn't even realize what she did. She believed she was helping Oliver. Then he hangs up. Joe tries Emily's line, but it goes to voicemail. Defeated, he slumps in exhaustion. His asthma flares up, and as he struggles to calm himself, an officer enters, telling him a woman wants to speak with him. It's Emily. Joe is connected, and she says she's going home to be with her kids. Joe, torn apart, tells her she can't go home, that she needs help. Emily looks at her blood-stained hands in confusion. She asks whose blood it is, insisting it isn't hers. Joe explains it isn't Henry's either, but can't bring himself to say it's Oliver's. Emily panics as the realization sets in. She climbs an overpass, preparing to end it all, saying she's going to join her son. Joe pleads desperately, but nothing works. Finally, he confesses his own truth.
I'm gonna go be with Oliver.
I killed a man. A boy, actually. Do you hear me? 19 years old. Joseph. I just wanted to punish him.
Emily asks why. Joe says he wanted to punish the boy. He acted out of rage, lost control, and killed him. It's the dark past that has haunted him for months. He says he doesn't want to kill again, and begs Emily to let him save her. Joe hears police sirens in the background. Emily whispers that she'll be joining her son, and the line cuts. Joe breaks down, crying. He calls her number again and again, but it doesn't connect. Finally, he calls the highway patrol. They inform him Emily is safe. She climbed down from the overpass on her own. Relief floods through him, and as he sits there weeping, the female officer walks in. Joe tries to hide his emotions, asking what she wants. She tells him Oliver was saved just in time and is in the ICU. Joe, overwhelmed, leaves the room. He heads to the restroom and calls Rick. Tearfully, he tells him to confess the truth in court. Rick protests, saying he can't, that he's already filed an amended report. But Joe insists, lead with the truth. After ending the call, Joe dials one more number. It's Catherine. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video then subscribe for more movie recaps. See you in the next one.